2009, 2010, 2011. It was in a Labour government. Then we had the Conservative come in. David Cameron was the Prime Minister at the time. And there was a lot of things that essentially changed. And a lot of things started to get cut. Loads of kind of youth and community provisions that were providing activities for children and young people, and it was thriving. Now a lot of those things got stripped back, and then that money was utilised in other spaces. So now we fast forward, let's say within that 12-year period, what are we seeing? We're seeing an increase in terms of violence. We're seeing an increase in criminal exploitation of children and young people.
Hello and welcome to the African Descendants Forum. My name is Lisa and today I'm joined in the studio by Craig Pinkney to talk about the rising violence amongst our young people within the UK. Craig has built an organisation named Solve which aims to critically address the causes of violence and conflict through research, training, workshops and consultancy. Could you tell us a bit about your organisation and what you do at Solve?
So I guess across the organisations, the way that Solve is kind of set up, we've got like a set of sister organisations. So the Centre for Youth Violence and Conflict is very much what probably most people have recognised what I do as being one of the kind of leading experts in the area around serious violence and harm as it relates to children and young people. So we do training and development for professionals that work in a wide range of settings. The second level of the work that we do is around how do we mobilise communities to kind of get them involved in issues to do with violence and actually take it on board to respond in a range of different ways. And I guess the third level of the work that we do is around working with children and young people, and that's everything from raising awareness, building resilience, and we also offer therapeutic interventions for those children and young people. And then you've got the sister organisation, which is Solve Housing, which is separate but connected, which is Ofsted Registered Children's Homes. So we've got 2 homes in the Birmingham area, in the West Midlands. And then also the consultancy company that we have as well, which is more of an advisory role that I have with the work that I do within sports. So we've got a massive contract that we have with the Premier League, and we work with loads of different kind of football clubs to kind of get them to be aware of some of the issues around sexual violence and harm towards women, misogyny, some of the things that are the key themes of the day, but really enabling, I guess, the first team players to have a real education. And I think part of the work that I do in its totality, one is about how do I respond and resolve violence at its root.
Wow, that's a lot. You're a very busy man, aren't you?
Trying to be.
So when did you set up your organisation and what made you want to set it up?
So the organisations are fairly new. So the Centre for Youth Violence and Conflict started in 2020. When I left my former role, I was a lecturer at UCB in Birmingham at university. I was there for about 9.5 years, where I taught youth and community studies and modules like criminology, criminal justice, offender management. So kind of rooted within social science, really, and working directly with people. So Solve and the entities are quite new, but the work I've been doing in community is over 2 decades. So prior to my role working in the university in an academic space, I used to work for the youth service. I used to work as a senior youth worker, then was a centre manager for a period of time. So I've always worked with children and young people in a wide range of settings. I've done loads of kind of international work. I've worked in parts of Europe. I've worked in America. I've worked in the Caribbean. And a really interesting role at one point where I was doing some advisory and consultancy work with the Ministry of Justice in Jamaica. So I've had a real kind of interesting experience, not just working on the front line with children and young people, but also in the academic space, but also in a space of more of a strategic place of what I am. And I guess that kind of links to why I embarked on a PhD journey, because what I didn't say in the beginning, I'm also a PhD student in my final year of my PhD. And my PhD essentially looks at the correlation between mass multimedia, technology, AI, and it's linked to serious violence and harm towards children and young people. So I'm very much invested, and I feel like when people talk about my work, despite the fact that the company is quite new, I feel like I've been doing this for a lifetime.
No, you can tell you're really passionate about it. Just touching on what you said about when you've worked in Europe and stuff, what kind of work was you doing when you went to, I know you said in Caribbean you worked for with the Ministry of Justice. When you worked in, what other countries did you say you did?
So I've done stuff in Romania, Cyprus, Italy, Greece, Northern Ireland, France. So that was a part of a project.
Okay.
And that's what kind of got me into the academic space in the beginning.
Right.
So there was a project that had partner organisations from across Europe, and it was known as the EU Gangs Project,
Right.
where we kind of met with professionals in a range of different spaces, also academics in different spaces, to understand what youth violence was in their different contexts, to see if there were kind of similarities, if there were kind of differences, and kind of developed almost like a bespoke set of learning for individuals that want to respond to these issues at community level all the way up to policy.
Right.
So we developed the first Responding to Youth Violence course and was running at the university at the time. And then prior to me leaving and starting Solve, we gave the intellectual property to an amazing organisation also based in the West Midlands called ACT, CIC, and they also run this course nationally and also internationally, and we support some of the modules, and it's just nice, like last year they're in the Caribbean, you know, Guyana, so it's that far. So when I actually think back and when you ask me these questions, it just shows where I started off there, and the national and international reach that these learnings are providing for professionals that want to kind of enter into this particular space.
It's amazing that, you know, it's gone from England to then you've gone abroad and done work over there. It's really, really good. So in your professional opinion, because you've got a lot of qualifications and, you know, you've been in this work for so long, what do you feel has happened to the young people within the UK in terms of the rise of violence?
It's a loaded question because there's so many elements, and I know that you're familiar with some of my work, my research, but I guess for the listeners, if I was to kind of look at this in, let's say, a 15-year window, a lot of the things that many people would remember, a lot of the changes started post-2009.
Okay.
We may remember 2009, 2010, 2011. What did we have? A change in political sphere.
Yeah.
And we was in a Labour government. Then remember we had the coalition. Then we had the Conservative coming. David Cameron was the Prime Minister at the time, if you remember. And there was a lot of things that essentially changed. At that particular time, they were talking about the big society, if you remember. And we were talking about a lot of changes and a lot of things started to get caught. And just a few things that I can say that people may remember. You may remember connections. You may remember things like Sure Start. You know, you may remember, you know, loads of kind of youth and community provisions that were providing activities for children and young people, and it was thriving. Police were visible in the community. There used to be police in schools. Now a lot of those things got stripped back, and then that money was utilised in other spaces. So now we fast forward, let's say within that 12-year period, what are we seeing? We're seeing an increase in criminal exploitation of children and young people. Clearly that there's organised criminals that recognise that there's a vulnerability. We're seeing an increase in terms of violence. Some regions we see higher levels of violence as it relates to knives. Others you see firearms. Others you see kind of more antisocial types of behaviours. So whilst we see the rise in violence, there's a deeper question is, okay, well, now what's going on mentally for these children and young people? But then we think, has there been any investment in the mental health of children and young people and their well-being? Well, no. And then we then got to look at the services that are out there to support. All of them have reached their capacity. So now we find schools having to deal with all of the issues that once the youth and community and third sector organisations that used to help and support. So now everybody blames the schools. And then you've got the schools that have also reached their capacity and they want to have help within local authorities. They've also reached their capacity. CAMS, all of these things that are put in place to support children and young people's mental health, they've also reached their capacity. Then you've also got the parents. And remember there was provisions and systems in place to support parents. They've now disappeared. So we see a completely societal change. Then you've also got to look at economics. You know, what is the economic sphere? You know, people are living in a crisis even now. Then you've got to also consider, okay, well, what's happening in terms of finance and economics in different ways. You've got gentrification that's coming in, people with big businesses knocking down old flats and building new things, and people are moving from one place that can't afford to be in another place to another space. And then you've also got to consider COVID-19 and the impact that's had on humanity. Not even alone just talking about young people, but just adults.
Thank you, Craig, for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure having you.
As always, thank you.
And to our audience at home, if you want to know more about the African Descendants Forum and how to get involved, please visit www.kirkleeslocaltv.com/the ADF, or you can email us at africandescendantsforum@gmail.com. Thank you for joining us today on the African Descendants Forum, and we'll see you soon.